I can't do this anymore, Kody. Those 7 words didn't just break up a marriage, they shattered the very essence of sister wives. For over a decade, viewers witnessed Kody Brown smile through the mess. The tension, the unspoken isolation. But behind each episode's placid veneer, something more sinister was festering. Resentment, silence, and a secret plan to escape it all. And if you have any idea why Kody walked out, wait till you hear what actually shattered her. I can't do this anymore, Kody. 7 soft words. But they struck with the force of an earthquake. That was when Kody Brown's life was forever altered. That was when the bright, smiling woman fans believed they understood finally spoke up what she'd kept bottled up for years. She seemed calm, collected, perhaps even serene on the outside, but behind that smile was weariness. The kind that results from being invisible for so long. Kody had told herself for years that love was patience, that family sacrificed, and that silence preserved peace. But silence can be the most deafening form of heartbreak. Each time Kody glanced away, each plan that excluded her, each giggle that didn't involve her, another brick of faith in the marriage quietly eroded. There wasn't a single explosion, no yelling match or dishes hurled. It was a gradual unraveling, minute by minute, day by day, until even she couldn't identify the life she was still fighting to preserve. And if you believe that's the saddest thing, wait until you hear what happened when she finally figured out she wasn't living in love anymore. She was living in someone else's dream. That night, the house was quieter than it normally was. Kody sat on the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the desert fade into the kind of darkness that feels endless. The stars above Flagstaff looked distant, almost mocking, like they knew her truth before she could say it out loud. She wasn't angry. Not yet, just empty. The kind of emptiness that comes when you've given every version of yourself and still come up short. She could hear laughter coming from another room. Not hers. She used to find comfort in the sound of that. Evidence of family, but now it just reminded her of the life she was being erased from. Kody had been acting different of late. Distant, defensive, nigh on cold. He spoke of rules, boundaries, and obedience as if love was a to-do list. And somewhere along the way, he'd ceased to regard her in the eye. That's when Kody knew something had shifted for good. Love wasn't being given. It was being dispensed. And she was always receiving the tiniest morsel. She wanted to repair it. God, she tried. She prayed, cooked, smiled, remained strong for the kids. But one night, as she sat setting the table and counted one vacant chair after another, something in her at last came to a standstill. It was then that she realized this wasn't home anymore. It was a memory that she continued to stay within. And if you imagine that revelation stung, wait until you hear what Kody told her next. The one thing that caused her to disbelieve entirely. He stood in the doorway that evening, arms folded, eyes icy. No rage in his tone, only finality. The kind that leaves no hope. I don't want an intimate relationship anymore, he told her. That's all, no explanation, no softness, no attempt to see how much those words would hurt. Kody went still. For a moment she thought she'd misheard him. But then she saw the way he gazed over her. Not at her. And in that silence, something within her snapped so quietly, it sounded almost like relief. She nodded, smiled ever so faintly, and stepped away so he would not see the tears. Because after so many years of attempting, of pleading for love in small amounts, she had suddenly understood. She didn't have to beg anymore. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, looking at the folded blankets, the vacant space next to her, and the photographs that promised forever. All these memories weighed more now, like a baggage she wasn't aware she was still carrying. By dawn, something had changed. She prepared breakfast as usual, laughed with the children as if everything were normal. But within, she was already gone. Her heart had packed up much earlier than her suitcases would. And yet, even as she started making secretive preparations to leave, Kody never ceased loving. Not in the way that people assume. She loved the family they had created, the kids they had raised, the years they had endured. But she was finished loving someone who no longer loved her in return. And if you thought it was easy for her to walk out, wait until you hear what she did before walking out. So peaceful, so serene, even Kody didn't realize what hit him. The sun was still rising early when Christine made her move. No angry goodbye. No fight. Only stillness. She folded the final shirt into the suitcase, zipped it up, and sat quietly for a moment. Her hands shook, but her heart did not. This time, she was not fleeing. She was coming to herself. When Kody finally saw that something was amiss, he asked where she was headed. She did not scream, did not blame, did not weep. She just said, "I love you, but I love myself too." For a second, he didn't answer. Perhaps he believed it to be another hollow threat, another burst of emotion that would subside. But when he looked into her eyes, peaceful, resolute, no glimmer of doubt, he knew she meant it. She embraced her kids tightly, told them everything would be all right, and packed her bags into the car. The air outside was lighter, crisper, as if the world had been holding its breath for this exact moment. There wasn't any big music, no close-up with the camera. There was only Christine, closing the car door and revving the engine. The woman once who had framed her existence on being enough, was now finally deciding to be complete instead. As the house fell out of view in the rearview mirror, she didn't glance back. She didn't have to. The woman she'd once been still lingered in that doorway, waiting to be released. And now she was. But here's the reality no one saw coming. Christine didn't go out in a rage. She departed in peace. And that tranquility would quickly reveal all the fissures in the good family facade they'd been maintaining for all those years. Because as soon as she drove off, Sister Wives' narrative forever altered. News spreads quickly in a family of that size. But silence spreads quicker. When Christine departed, there was a change in the atmosphere within that home. We could all sense it, even if nobody was talking about it. Dinner laughter was subdued. Smiles, slimmer. Kody attempted to carry on as if everything was okay, but the reality was etched across his face. He had lost control, not only of a marriage, but of the narrative he had constructed about himself. For the first time, the family did not rally round him. They saw him struggle to understand something Christine had already learned, that love without respect is only an illusion. Janelle knew it. Meri had experienced it. Even Robin, behind her guarded smiles, could sense the foundation crumbling beneath them. Christine, on the other hand, was hundreds of miles away, in a new kitchen, unloading dishes that felt suddenly lighter. Every sound, every little action, a door opening, a cup set on the counter, held a kind of liberation she hadn't known for years. She wasn't waiting for permission anymore, but Kody couldn't help but relive the moment she had left. He labeled it betrayal. He labeled it selfish. But deep in his heart, he knew it wasn't a matter of anger. It was a matter of truth. The truth that Christine had at last selected peace over pretense. And if you believe that truth came easily, just wait until you see how the other wives started questioning everything they'd ever heard about loyalty and love and faith. In the weeks to come, the silence within the Brown family wasn't a calm one. It was oppressive. The kind of silence that hangs around after someone is finally honest. Christine's absence reverberated in every dialogue, every family meeting, every quiet spot in the house. Janelle started to think differently. For years she'd convinced herself that maintaining peace was strength, remaining was faith. But now each time she gazed at the vacant chair where Christine once sat, she couldn't help but wonder if in fact going was the more courageous option. Meri felt it too. She'd always assumed she could wait things out, that eventually Kody would look at her again, really look at her. But when Christine departed, Meri understood how long she'd been in emotional exile, loyal to a marriage that had already moved on without her. And Robin, the one all of them referred to as the favorite, wasn't immune to its effects either. She didn't want to think that Christine leaving would make any difference. But she felt the tension narrowing in. Kody was fidgety, furious, preoccupied. He wasn't guarding their family anymore. He was guarding his ego. Christine, on the other hand, was radiant in her new world. Her laughter was different, richer, authentic. She wasn't faking for cameras or treading eggshells for another's ease. She was learning who she is when nobody is observing. And that frightened Kody more than anything. For the first time, his narrative wasn't at the center of the show anymore. Christine's independence was, and if you imagine that the storm there ended, wait to see how her bravery started to unravel everything that Kody believed he could manage. Kody was always the voice of authority, the man with answers, rules, and control. But once Christine was gone, something in him broke. It wasn't pride. It was panic. The cameras picked up on it in small moments. The agitated pacing, the quick temper, the mandatory smiles that fell short of his eyes. He told people he was fine, that Christine had made her choice, but secretly he was afraid that the rest would do the same. He began to blame the wives, the situation, even the culture that once kept them together. He spoke in terms of loyalty, of betrayal, of how Christine had left the family. What he failed to mention, what he couldn't bring himself to say, was that she had simply ceased to believe in his definition of love. The rest of them stood by and let him come undone step by step. Janelle attempted to talk sense to him, telling him that Christine's choice did not have to ruin everything. But Kody was having none of it. His ego outlouded his heart. Every discussion devolved into defense. Every inquiry felt like an attack. The man who used to speak of oneness was now standing solo in his own castle of ego. In the meantime, Christine remained silent. She did not need to defend herself. Her silence spoke volumes more than any argument could ever do. As Kody struggled to dictate the terms, she was busy penning a new script, one with laughter, freedom, and the type of peace that does not require approval. But the cracks in Kody's universe were only just starting to appear, because soon another wife would begin to wonder the very same thing Christine used to mutter under her breath. What if I deserve better than this? And if you thought Kody was prepared for that, you're about to find out just how fast his ideal world started to crumble. It didn't come all at once for Janelle. It was gradual, like a silent wave swelling higher every day, one she didn't even know was increasing until it ultimately broke. She had wasted years telling herself that reason could mend love, that waiting patiently could restore what space had destroyed. But Christine's bravery sowed a seed she could no longer deny. One evening, Janelle stood in the kitchen surrounded by the racket of everyday life. Children chattering, plates clinking, and suddenly it all felt out of place. Not the commotion, but the hollowness beneath it. She saw that she'd been living, not existing. Her devotion had become routine, and her courage had begun to feel like silence. Kody walked in, discussing family meetings, plans, and control. The same speech, the same voice. Janelle nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere, going over Christine's words. I love you, but I love myself too. The words repeated louder than anything Kody ever said that day. That evening, Christine received a call from Janelle. Their call wasn't intense. It wasn't lengthy, just two women gasping in the same reality, that choosing yourself is not betrayal, but survival. Christine's laughter over the phone was lighter, freer, and for the first time in years, Janelle smiled and smiled truly. Something in her moved, softly but irretrievably. She knew she wasn't ready to go yet, but she also knew that she could. At the same time, Kody was starting to sense the distance. The unity he had once ruled by was unraveling, one quiet revelation at a time. The family he had created in deference to his power was beginning to reassemble in accordance with truth. And if you thought Janelle's wake-up moment was discreet, just wait until you witness how her next move turns everything around. For herself, for Kody, and for the rest of the family who all of a sudden couldn't keep up the charade anymore. The breaking point arrived softly, the way most truth does. Janelle had been bottling it up for months. The frustration, the disappointment, the fatigue of being the one who was always working at keeping peace in a war that would never cease. Kody entered the room one night, set to discuss loyalty and respect once more. But this time she didn't simply listen. He began with his familiar words: rules, structure, unity. But to Janelle, they rang empty now. The echoes of a belief that she no longer held. She regarded him, looked at him hard, and saw not the man she had loved, but a man fighting so hard to hold on to something that was already lost. Kody, she said softly, her voice calm but firm. You're fighting for a version of us that doesn't exist anymore. He froze. He froze. He wasn't used to her challenging him. Not like this. She didn't raise her voice, didn't cry, didn't accuse. She simply told the truth, that she wanted a partnership, not a dictatorship, that she wanted love that felt like home, not a contract. The ensuing silence was heavier than any argument. Kody blinked, grasping for words, but for once, there were none. He simply stood there, observing the woman he believed would never question him, finally pick herself. From that day forward, everything was different. Their conversations were shorter, their laughter less frequent. Janelle ceased waiting for Kody to realize she was missing, because she knew he never would. And when she packed lightly to leave for a few days, she did not say separation. She said space, but she knew what it was really. The first sip of liberty she had ever breathed. And if you believe Kody would be able to manage another wife finding her own strength, wait until you see how that epiphany started to tear down the facade he'd worked for decades to maintain. Kody never thought he would lose his universe with words, with vows, commandments, and the facade of mastery. But when Janelle walked away, something within him broke at last. For the first time, he was not the one departing. He was being left. The wives who had once orbited around him were now orbiting in their own space, and he could no longer draw them back. He attempted to pin it on the cameras, the celebrity, the pressure, but in the stillness, when he was alone, and no one was looking, he could see the reality reflected back at him. He had constructed his family based on loyalty rather than love, fear rather than liberty. And when Christine left him, the ground shook. When Janelle started to wander away, it crumbled. There were evenings when he'd spend alone in the living room, the same room where once there was the ring of laughter and din. Now there was only silence. Oppressive, reverberating, near accusatory. He'd go through old albums, his face smiling next to women who no longer smiled in the same manner. He convinced himself he was the victim. But in reality, he was the designer of his own isolation. Christine was flourishing. Janelle was mending. Even Meri had started to discover her own quiet strength. They weren't needing his permission anymore. They were rewriting the story without him. And perhaps that's what stung the most. Realizing that his absence didn't break them. It set them free. However, Kody couldn't release. He was constantly asking himself the same question repeatedly. How did it all come crumbling down so utterly? But perhaps the more pertinent question was the one he never considered asking. Did he ever construct it on love in the first place? And if you think that's the conclusion of the story, it isn't, because the truth of sister wives isn't really who stayed or who went. It's about how the love that bound a family together ends up being the same love that shatters them. A freedom looks different on every body. For Christine, it was laughter. Raw, unadulterated laughter that hadn't been spoken in years. She was cooking in her own kitchen again, surrounded by warmth and simplicity. No cameras, no tension, no pretending, just her and the quiet peace of a life finally lived on her terms. She started sharing her joy with the world, not as someone's wife, but as herself. Strong, independent, and radiant. Janelle discovered freedom in concentration. She immersed herself in rebuilding, not only financially but emotionally as well. Every little victory counted. Every move toward stability felt like reclaiming part of her spirit. There were flashes of self-doubt, times when the loneliness moved in, but she met them differently now. Rather than asking, "What did I do wrong?" she started to ask, "What do I deserve next?" Meri's journey was quieter, slower, but maybe the most profound of all. For years she had waited, for attention, for affection, for acknowledgement that never came. But somewhere in that long silence, she realized she didn't need anyone's permission to be whole. She started traveling, meeting new people, and rediscovering the version of herself she'd buried beneath years of disappointment. Meanwhile, Kody stood back. He observed these women, his wives, his girlfriends, his past, living on without him. And that hurt more than any fight ever did. The vision of his family, the vision he believed he had, now belonged to the women who had stepped away from him. And perhaps in a twisted sort of way, it was poetic justice. For years he sought control. What he received in return was clarity, that love without respect is nothing more than an illusion waiting to be shattered. And if you thought the tale would end here, just wait until you see what goes down when Kody actually attempts to rebuild. Not his marriages, but himself. Because sometimes the biggest makeover isn't the one you see on TV. It's the one you don't see, off camera, when no one's watching. There is an odd sort of quiet after a storm. It is not peace. It is the reverberation of all that is lost. That is where Kody was today. The man who used to command a household of 20 was alone in a home meant for many, surrounded by memories that no longer felt home. The laughter, the ruckus, the commotion, all gone. The voices that had filled the rooms had faded into their own lives, their own futures. And for the first time he wasn't furious. He was just stationary. He gazed at the old pictures, snaps in time, birthdays, holidays, the smiles that once felt authentic. But now they seemed different. He saw the tension at the edges of their eyes, the space standing behind the smiles. It wasn't that they didn't love him. It was that love no longer sufficed. Kody always thought leadership was about control. Perhaps true leadership was something gentler. Listening, releasing, letting other people grow without fear. And that's what he never knew until too late. He drove out there one night to the old land where they'd both once imagined they'd build houses side by side. The land was vacant, still, untarnished, like an unfulfilled promise. He stayed there for a long time, the wind rustling through the grass. And he said softly, perhaps this was never about constructing houses. Perhaps it was about learning how to construct hearts. He no longer sought forgiveness. He simply wanted understanding, from them, from himself, from the tale that had shaped his existence. And in that quiet, everything shifted. Because for the first time, Kody Brown wasn't the husband, the father, or the authority figure. He was simply a man, standing amidst the ruins of his own decisions, knowing that sometimes losing it all is the only way to really understand what you had. So perhaps the saga of sister wives was never about polygamy or celebrity. Perhaps it was about love, and how even love when poorly managed can collapse under its own stress. But what do you believe? Was Kody the victim of a collapsing belief system, or the mastermind of his own destruction? Let me know in the comments below, because this tale, it's far from finished. Months had gone by, and still the tale wouldn't end. The cameras had stopped rolling ages ago. The lights had gone out, and the world had shifted to the next saga. Yet for those who experienced it, the reverberations still persisted. Christine was constructing something new, not a life but a belonging. Her laughter was no longer for the cameras. It was genuine. The children sensed it. The public sensed it. She did not have anything to prove anymore. She was just living. Janelle too had settled into her own rhythm. Her independence had become introspective strength. She was no longer responding to the past. She was forging a future. The pain still bubbled up here and there, in memories, in old photographs, but it no longer ruled her. It reminded her. Meri had become the face of something unexpected. Strength. Those who once felt sorry for her now looked up to her. She wasn't seeking closure anymore. She was penning her next page in peace, sans bitterness, sans blame. And then there was Kody. He'd gone quiet in public for a while. No interviews, no explanations, just space. But those who knew him said he had changed. Not suddenly, not overnight, but in tiny human increments. A little quieter, a little gentler, sometimes lost, sometimes thoughtful. There were times he'd drive by old haunts, the houses, the landmarks of a life once so lush, and hang back, as if trying to place the man who lived there. One of his children once made a remark that stuck with him. Dad, perhaps it wasn't about who was right, perhaps it was about who hurt. That sentence struck more deeply than anything else ever had. Because for the first time ever, he realized that everyone, himself included, had been struggling pain in their own manner. So perhaps this isn't the end of the sister wives saga. Perhaps it's just the quiet chapter nobody saw coming. The one where everyone figures out how to live apart, but still be part of something that once meant a lot. And if you think the story's over, guess again. Because sometimes the strongest stories aren't the ones that end with a breakup. They're the ones that end with understanding. And that, more than anything, could be the beginning of peace.